So this is a story from the Finn cycle of Irish mythology. This is a story about Fionn Mac Cumhaill and the birth of Oshín. It's also a story about that gives a little glimpse into Celtic otherworlds, and there are many, many Celtic otherworlds, and sometimes the information we've got about them is a bit patchy, and there's lots of them. There's the land under the sea that I've talked about here before. There's the Plane of Wonder, there's the multicolored realm, there's the Tirnano, the realm of youth. But in this particular story, we get a little glimpse into the realm of the Sidhe. So that's, the Sidhe are, I suppose in English we might use the word fairy or fae, but it's a little bit different to maybe 19th century or Disney ideas, popular culture ideas about fairies. The realm of the Sidhe is kind of, I like to think of it like a parallel universe. You know, it's here, but not here. They're like us, but not like us. You know, they're born, they die. They're quite often aware of us, but we're not aware of them. But sometimes there's points in the year, like Samhain, Halloween, or particular places in the landscape where there's a thin place where the Sidhe can come through. And they're not good or bad, really, the Sidhe. They're sort of ambivalent, but we get a little glimpse sometimes in the folklore of the weirdness of this realm. And this is really what the fairy realm is like. We get a little glimpse of that in this story. Long ago, long ago, Fionn Mac Cumhaill and the warrior poets of Britain and Ireland, the Fianna, were making their slow way back to camp after an unsuccessful hunt, and they were marching in silence. When just at that moment, a deer, a doe, a female deer, leapt out of cover and stood there quivering in a shaft of light that was piercing the forest canopy. And just then all silence fell away from those hunting men, the Fianna, and the dogs and the men just shouted up into action, and the hunt, the chase, was suddenly on. Now this was a beautiful, beautiful deer that went dancing and prancing through the foliage, through the undergrowth, and all the hunt was on, all the hunt through all the forests and over the hills and dales and through the undergrowth. But Finn, he was quickest of foot out of all the Fianna, and his two hounds, their names were Bran and Scolan, they were quickest out of any of the hunting dogs of the Fiannan. And before long, the world became a blur of blue and green and brown, and Finn, in the joy of the hunt, had left all the other Fianna behind, and nothing existed in the world but the landscape itself and that deer, Bran and Scolan, his hounds, and his swift feet moving through the undergrowth. Well, this deer was fast, and it just leapt and cavorted and went on all sorts of different paths, all the way through the forest, all the way through the dale, all the way through the valleys, all the way over the hills, until there was nothing but the joy of the hunt left. But something was up, something different this time. You see, Finn, he knew every shape, every movement of his two hunting dogs, but he could tell something was wrong. He could tell something by the way that they would occasionally look back and glance at him with a worried eye. See, these two dogs, they had human intellect, but that's another story, and they were trying to tell him something. Still, Finn carried on running faster than he'd ever run in his life after this beautiful, majestic female deer that just kept running and running, till eventually they came to a wide open plain in the middle of the valley, and Finn realized he had left all his other compatriots long behind him. He couldn't even hear the sound of the other dogs anymore. And then this deer in front of him just lay down on the ground. And he thought, oh, but it doesn't even seem exhausted, but it's given up. Shame. My dogs will tear it to pieces now. But they didn't. they just started to do something very strange. They just leapt and danced around this deer. They didn't kill it. They treated it like a friend. And Finn marvelled at this and thought, what a strange thing. And he drew near, and he didn't get out his knife. He laid down his spear. He just approached this deer, and then his two dogs just came and danced around him, and that deer did the same. And then it did a very strange thing. It pressed its soft, velvety muzzle into the palm of his hand, and he thought, this is no ordinary deer. Well, he made his slow way back with his two dogs and that deer following him just like a hound, and got back to the dun, the fortress of the Fianna, where they had made their camp for the winter. And it was like a hero's welcome. "Where have you been, Finn?" said Gol Mac Morna. And when they saw this deer and saw that it was not afraid, it was tame, they marvelled at it and thought, this deer, they agreed with Fionn Mac Cumhaill, this deer is not to be killed. This deer will be a tame pet of us. Now, Fionn Mac Cumhaill later that night was in his bedchamber, just marvelling at the strange events of the day, when the door to his room opened, and there, standing in the doorway, was the Sky Woman of the Dawn, the most radiant, beautiful young woman that Finn had ever seen in his life. And immediately his heart was moved with love for her in that way that you know, that we all know. He said, "Fionn Mac Cumhaill, I know who you are, and I've come seeking your protection." And she told him where she was from. She said she has not always been in deer form. She comes from the realm of the Sidhe, and for a long time she has been looking for the one that she loves in the realm of mortal men. And at that, something chilled in Finn's heart, because he had such love for her. He was thinking, who among my men, who among the men of Ireland must this exquisite creature love? But he said, "How can I be of service?" And she said, "In my realm, the realm of faery, many men have come asking for my hand, but I have said I will not give my hand in marriage to any man of the realm of the Sidhe." And Finn said to her, "Well, that is your right." But then she said, "One day, a dark druid of the Sidhe came to me and put his eye on me and said, 'I will take you as my wife.' And I rejected him, and he was very angry at that. And from that day forth, I could never be free of him. I always saw his eye in the waters, in the sky, in the bushes, in the tree line. When I closed my eyes at night and in my dreams, I always saw his eye watching me, and I could not escape it. And eventually, when I rejected him again, he turned me into a deer in the realm of the Sidhe. But I knew my one salvation, my one hero was in the realm of mortal men. And it was you, Fionn Mac Cumhaill, and I've come to give my love to you. And I managed to find a thin place between the realm of the Sidhe and the realm of mortal men of Ireland, and I came through that, and sure enough, you were there." And at hearing these words, and feeling his love for this woman he had only just met, Finn just broke down and professed his love to her as well. And just like that, they fell into a deep love together, a deep, deep love that was meant to be. Fionn Mac Cumhaill, he used to love the melody of the birds in the woods. He used to relish over over all the sounds of the natural world. But now, the only song was in the music of Saba. That was her name. Was in the music of her graceful movement, or in the gentle inclination of her head, or in the love that was in her eyes for him and no other. All the joy of the feast, all the joy of the hunt, all the joy of the battle, that ebbed away for Finn. He wanted to spend every moment with Saba because there was music in all of their interactions together. So this went on for a long time, but the Fianna, they got a job to do, right? They've got to defend the shores. They've got to defend the shores of Britain and Ireland from attack. And one day, the word got out that the Northmen were coming over the sea. They're sailing over the sea, and we're going to invade Ireland. So the Fianna, led by Fionn Mac Cumhaill, had to go and fight him off. So away Finn went, and he said goodbye to his dear one, Saba, on the walls of the fort. And he said, I will be back before you know it. And off he went. And, he didn't normally hang about Fionn Mac Cumhaill, but he was so enraged at these Northmen for keeping him away from his beloved for a single day that he headed that battle, and not a single Northman was left alive except for the dead that were buried in the ground of Ireland. And the battle was won, and Fionn Mac Cumhaill was making his way back to the fort of the Fianna because he wanted to be with Saba again. And all of the Fianna, they said, "Hey, come on, don't leave us," said Gol Mac Morna, said Conan, said Cult. They all said, "Hey, what is a feast without Fionn Mac Cumhaill?" And Fionn Mac Cumhaill said, "Well, you're right, but I need to get back to my beloved, and you all know, you've all been there." And they quietly agreed, and they secretly remembered certain sets of eyes or lips or noses now lost in the chambers of time and memory. And they said, you go on, be with Saba. And Fionn Mac Cumhaill said, thanks, lads, and left them to the feasting and the fires and the ale and the talks of battle. And he sped silently back through the night, back to the fort to be with Saba. And he was running back towards, running as fast as his feet would take him, back towards the lights of the hill fort. And he thought, this is strange. My loved one would have seen me by now. She would have seen me passing across the glen, and she is not running out to meet me. But he put it to one side, and then he was running, and he was getting closer and closer. He was like, surely my loved one would have seen me in the pale moonlight by now and would have called out to me. Something's definitely wrong. And he got to the great door in the wall of that fort, and something was up. The sentries weren't on duty. There were people running around in there. There was chaos inside the citadel. And he got inside, and no one would meet his eye. There were women running around wailing. There were certain sentries that were staying out of eyeshot of Fionn Mac Cumhaill. Eventually, he saw his steward and said, "Oi, what's going on here?" And his steward, being the brave and loyal man that he was, said to Fionn Mac Cumhaill something bad, something very bad has happened. And Phil said, "Don't spare me. Tell me like it is." He said, "Well, you came back just a few hours ago." Finn said, "Well, I didn't. I came back just now." "Well, I know that now, but your image came back just a few hours ago." And Saba, she said, "I need to go out and meet my lord," but we knew something was wrong. We tried to stop her, but we couldn't. She commanded us to stand aside, and she said, "I am going to meet my love, the father of my child that is not yet born. I must go and meet him." And she ran out into the darkness, and then your image, what we thought was you with your two hounds, Bran and Scolan there, you stretched out your arms and she ran to meet you. But then your form changed and you stretched out a rod of hazel and you touched Saba on the shoulder, and she turned into a deer and tried to run away, but your two hounds grabbed hold of her and pulled her back. And 1, 2, 3 times she tried to escape, and your hounds pulled her back. And then with that hazel wand, you, or what seemed like you, made a portal in the fabric of the air and vanished through it with your hounds and with Saba, and then vanished. And that hole sealed up, and then just an hour or two later you arrived, and into this situation now. And Finn understood that the dark man of the Oshín had come back to claim his beloved, and he went and shut himself in his room, and he didn't emerge for a long time. And when he did emerge, he was not the same. He was ruined by grief. And though he would go on the hunt after that time, and he would always do his duties defending the shores of this land, there was something hollow in him, and whenever he had a spare moment, he would go off searching just with his two dogs, just with the two wise dogs, Bran and Scolan. He would go off hunting for a little deer again. Now one day maybe when the sort of the salve of time had started to lick Finn's love wounds a little bit, a great chase went up when they were marching back one day from the hunt, a bit like at the beginning of the story. And Finn found himself running, following the chase, following the scent, and he was running as fast as he had ever run in his life before, or maybe he'd only run that fast once in his life. And his two dogs, Bran and Scolan, were at the very, very, very front of the chase, and Finn was running faster and faster, and all the other hunters, all the rest of the Fianna, had got lost in a great green mist behind him. And eventually Finn got to a thicket, a place between two valleys, a strange place. And he came up and found his two dogs growling and barking. And they were chasing, intimidating away all the other hounds of the Fianna. And they would not let them come close to what was concealed in this little thicket behind them. But Finn came up and they even growled at him. He gave one a little cuff and then opened this little thicket, and he saw what they were protecting. It was a boy, a young boy, just yay high, with golden hair, dark eyes, and a bit of a glow about him. And this little boy just posted his little pink hand into Finn's, and Finn's little heart melted, and he remembered that time when that deer posted its little velvet snout into his palm all those years ago. And he picked up this boy, he looked into his eyes, and he thought, it's a bit like me, a bit like Saba. And he understood. He put that little boy on his shoulders, and his two hounds walking side by side, and he walked back to the den, and that boy, he had a hero's welcome. Those two dogs would not let anyone go near him. That was a pretty powerful seal of approval from those two wise divine hounds. And eventually, if any of the other dogs started to act up around that boy, they would show him what for, as the saying goes. And that boy, well, eventually he would just march around among a sea of those hounds, of those dogs, and Finn loved that boy so much, even though he didn't have human speech, but eventually he learned it. Eventually he learned human speech, that boy. And Finn knew that he was his own son, but he didn't know from whence he came. But when that boy learned language, obviously he could only remember bits of his past life in fragments. We all know what childhood is like. But he said before Finn found him, he was in a place, a strange place. It was a wide plain that was full of all sorts of fruits and special things to eat. But wherever he went, in any direction, he would find a cliff that just stretched all the way up to heaven. So he couldn't ever really leave the place. And he was alone there most of the time, except for a deer that he loved very much and would sort of nuzzle him and take him to places where there was food or fresh water. He loved that deer. Loved that deer. And there was a man, tall, thin man, dressed in dark clothes with a bald head and eyes black from lid to lid. He was frightening, and he would come sometimes and speak to that deer. Sometimes he would speak in soft tones, and sometimes harsh tones. You wouldn't understand what the man was saying, but always the reaction from that deer that he loved would always be the same. It would draw away in fear. But eventually, one day they were talking for a long time, a long, long time, and he remembers that dark man drawing that deer away through a hole in the cliff. And he never saw her again. And shortly after that time, you, Dad, you, Finn, you discovered me with those two hounds in a thicket. I can't remember anything else. Well, that boy was Oshín, whose name means the little deer. And it wasn't the last time that Oshín had an encounter with the realm of faery, because of course Oshín went across the waves to the land of the ever young, and when he came back, he told all these stories of the Irish mythology to St. Patrick, and that's why we have them today. So a little story there about Fionn Mac Cumhaill and the birth of Oshín, and just a little glimpse into the nature of some of these Celtic otherworlds that we know so little about, but we sometimes get little glimpses in the folklore. And that's a beautiful, beautiful story, which maybe I'll tell again on this channel another time. Thank you.